Hello and welcome back. This week, I am talking to Rose Clark, who is a parenting coach in a methodology that I've actually never heard of. And so I'm really excited to talk about it. Always love learning new things. And the reason I typically don't have people who talk about just parenting in general, because I think we all know that that doesn't always apply to our kiddos. I think we've all witnessed and experienced that our kiddos just need things a little bit different. And so what's really cool about Rose is that she has a kiddo who is one of us. So I'm really glad to have her here to be able to talk about herself, her kiddo, what she does, and to help all of us with new strategies and suggestions for our kiddos as well. So Rose, thank you very much for being here. Um, please tell us whatever you would like to about you.
Okay, sure. Yeah. So maybe I'll just kind of start off with, how I got into, becoming a parenting coach. And for me, like what I think about is I think about, how important parenting felt like it was going to be to me because I had a childhood that I didn't particularly enjoy. I didn't particularly enjoy the way that I was raised. I didn't really fully understand all the pieces. I just knew that I wanted my kids to feel differently than how I felt. And I wanted them to really have a lot of self-belief, a lot of self-trust. And so before I got married to my husband, I sat him down and I had a little chat. I said, okay, I want to talk about parenting with you before we do this thing. And I said, my thoughts are, I want my kids to be able to have their own feelings and thoughts and opinions. I wanted it to be okay for them to be different, than to have different identities than we have. And I want them to have a close emotional attachment with both their parents. And he was fully on board with that. And, when I had two under two and the yelling started, I knew that something was not right. It was not okay. That I had these thoughts of things that I wanted, but the way I was treating my children was not so good. And
So when
so
you say the yelling started, you mean from you?
I started yelling. All the
Okay.
unshed tears, all the unexpressed anger from my childhood started coming out all over my kids, all over my husband, and I was not okay with it. So I started looking. I started reading all the blog posts and all the books, and nothing was really sticking. And then I came across language of listening, and I just completely fell head over heels for it for two reasons. One is that it was all about noticing the strengths in the child and coaching those strengths to the surface. And I thought that's really giving them that self-trust and that self-belief, and seeing who they are, right? And really letting that shine. But it also allowed me to hold boundaries that got me connecting with my kids, that left me and the child feeling empowered instead of this whole thing of me trying to be patient, because that's what we're supposed to be as parents, right? And I think especially parents with neurodivergent kids, there's a whole other level of patience that needs to come in there, right? And so patience, and then blow my stack. And I didn't like that. I felt out of control, right? And so language of listening really was such a beautiful, simple, genius parenting model. And then I found out they were doing a coach's training, and I hopped on because I thought, well, what better way to support my family and also to support other people than to, get fully trained in it. And then the piece that really hit me was the reparenting, that actually these tools work for every relationship, including your relationship with yourself. And they allowed me to reparent myself. Now, fast forward ahead a number of years, my husband goes to school to become a therapist. In the midst of his training, he learns about this online tool that you can kind of have a look at. And he's like, I think I'm going to do that. I'm going to check and see because some of these symptoms sound like ADHD. And during becoming a therapist is when he found out he had lived through decades not undiagnosed. And he's like, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense, about who I am in my life and my experiences. And in that during that time, our youngest really was showing up as different than our older daughter. And I just thought they're different, like
Mm-hmm.
it's just life. But one of the things that really, really stuck out to me was how incredibly sensitive her skin was to certain clothing. For example, she loves animals, and we were able to get her into this little horseback riding school, but she needed the special boots. And some days she just could not get those boots on. She couldn't get the socks on. The socks drove her nuts. And then to have those tight boots on her feet. And we didn't know it had anything to do with ADHD. We didn't know any of that stuff. And as she got older, some of those things, those symptoms and different things started showing up more and more, the
Mm-hmm.
sensitivity and the big emotions and those sorts of things. And holy moly, was I not so relieved that I had language of listening in my back pocket to help me deal with these bigger parenting issues. Because they're draining, they take more, but I always say she's the one that taught me how to be a parent. She's the one, and she's the one that's like, I mean, my other daughter's very loving and all that too. And I, of course I love her to pieces, but this little one has really caused me to dig deep and to really know who I am as a parent. And to really be able to help other people as well, right? If I had been born with two kids that, were very quiet and unassuming and very, right? Like I wouldn't have had that experience. And also, like I really find parenting is such a healing experience. And so being able to give her on such a deep level, especially that emotional support that she needs, which is different than my older daughter. My older daughter's very quiet. She's like the non-squeaky wheel. She doesn't speak up about things. And that's like the pendulum swinging the other direction. Right. I need to go after her more.
Right.
But my other daughter, she's had a lot more tantrums, a lot more blow-ups, and just a lot more emotion that she expressed. And that really allowed me to, like, again, be okay with my own emotions and really connect with her emotions. And it's been good. It's been so good and healing for both of us. It's been really beautiful. But then also to have my husband who remembers what it was like to be a child and have ADHD and go through and all those, because he's like, wait a second, my clothes felt really, scratchy and pokey too. And I had a hard time, like, and so like, it's been such a wonderful learning experience for me and experience in general. Having those two wonderful people by my side, because like I say, even though I don't have ADHD, most likely I have CPTSD, which is complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which has a lot of crossover actually with ADHD, yes. From my own childhood. So there is a lot of crossover for us. But I would say, like, for me, again, just to reiterate that idea that, like, her big emotions and being able to be there for her, has really allowed me to also be there for myself and that little person that I was. And so it's been very healing and very wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. And for everybody listening, I'll share, Rose and I had talked a little bit before we started recording how we both have similar thoughts and feelings about our childhood and our upbringing. And I think, Rose, I'm just going to assume that you and I are around the same age in general. I think most of the people who listen, because I can see the statistics, are around my age also. I think for those of us in our general generation, parenting was very different because of the generation that our parents fall into.
It really was. Yeah.
And so I think you have the mindset from our parents and their generation who parented us and our generation. And now I think there's such a difference and a disconnect between the way that a lot of us were parented and what we see in our kids. And I think this is, I'm not a parent, so I try to be really careful about not pretending like, I know what I'm talking about when it comes to parenting. But I do think there's a whole kind of revolution that has been happening for a while. We are all doing the best that we can. And I think so many of us have maybe some, little T trauma, big T trauma around things that happened when we were kids, around the way that we were raised. I even had something that came up in my personal life about a week ago that I realized was tied to the way that I was raised. And even right now, it's making me emotional, even just thinking about it. And so I think there's been this big kind of revolution going on where the people in our generation who are now parents, we are recognizing that we don't want to treat kids the way that things were for us, but that's what Do you know what I mean?
It's how your brain is wired. It's biological. It's there.
Exactly.
It's physical.
And my best analogy for this is I often think about, we tend to eat the way that we were fed when we were raised. until you start to learn more about nutrition. And so I think, I eat completely differently than how I was raised. Um, but it takes awareness and it takes learning, right? You have to learn new information, new strategies. And I relate the way we raise our kids to that same concept. If you don't know a different way to parent or even teacher, I'm a teacher. If you don't know a different way to teach kids than the way that you were taught, how could you possibly do anything differently? And so I think a part of it is creating the awareness, becoming aware that number one, our kiddos need to be parented and taught differently. And then number two, the awareness that you may not know how to do that. And then the second part of that is figuring out how to do that. What are the skills? What are the strategies? How can you teach your kids differently or parent them differently? So that was my long ramble about that. But I do think there's I think it's the combination of our generation struggling through our childhood, and then trying to raise our kiddos, especially if our kiddos are, their brains are wired differently. And the way that we were parented is, in my opinion, not only does it not work, it's actually counterproductive. As we have experienced, it's damaging to relationships, it's damaging to kids' mental health. You often get more significant challenges than there were to begin with if you continue to parent the way that a lot of us were parented.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Done. Yeah.
No, that
So,
was great. Yeah.
Rose, tell us about what is the foundation of the program that you support parents in? What are the methodologies? What are the things that it is designed to support?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a really beautiful parenting model, this language of listening created by a lady named Sandra Blackard. It's based off of child-parent relationship therapy, transformational coaching, and positive psychology. And she was able to take those things and really distill them down into something that's very simple, but like really, really deep. And so I love the way the model works because it's got these three premises, three beliefs. It actually has four, but the fourth one kind of overarches all of them. So I always talk about the three main ones, because that really is the rewiring of your brain. Those are the new beliefs. Those are the possibilities, right? Because that's what you were talking about. These possibilities don't exist for us. We don't even know what exists, right? It's almost like, the way I describe it sometimes is like, if you imagine, they say like, we found a new color in space, right? We're like, well, what could this color look like? It's a brand new color. It's like no other color. It's not a shade of this or a mix of that. It's a brand new color, right? Like, it's like your brain can't really conceptualize it, right? And so it's kind of like that, what you were saying. And so this model gives you these three beliefs, and it's the beliefs that really transform your parenting. It's that rewiring of your brain. But there's also these really simple tools that go with each of the beliefs to help you practice the belief over and over and over again, so that it does change your wiring. Because we have wiring it's like a highway, right? It's the easy way to go, and so our thoughts and our actions will go down those highways. And then the more we practice these new highways, and I have a way of explaining that too. I often tell people it's like trying to build a highway, but you're starting with a jungle. So you've got many layers to go, right? Like, it does take some effort. But
and
my
you
goodness,
have to destroy the old highway in the process in order to be able to
well,
build
a
the new
little bit, but the
highway.
old highway just kind of falls apart on its own because you're not using it, really. You just stop using it because, like, it's exactly what you said. It's not effective. And you get this little rush when you see how effective, these other tools can be, and how much they honor you as a person too. Like, one of my favorite blog posts, and one of my favorite things that I learned from language of listening, it's a blog post I go back to over and over again. It's talking about exaggerating, and Sandy talks about, because I was yelling at my kids, as I mentioned, like 2 under 2, and the yelling started, right? I was yelling at my kids, and I mean, when we're getting to the point of yelling, like, we're already in fight or flight. There's already like all the hormones and the energy and everything rushing through our body. To try to stop that train is kind of crazy. And so
Yes.
one of the things that Sandy teaches is just go into the anger, the emotion, but you turn it into a game. So like you can pound your fists and stomp your feet and go, oh, you're angry, mommy's coming, you know. And this is what I started doing with my kids is I'm like, oh crap, I'm getting angry, I can't stop. But I would just turn it into this little game, like, oh, mommy's coming, like angry mommy's coming, like look out, like, you know. And my kids started laughing every time I got angry, which was like amazing because now I knew I wasn't damaging them anymore. And the times that I started yelling and I forgot to do the angry mommy thing and turn it into a game, they would still laugh. And I was like, oh, thank goodness. Like it just took so much weight off of me because at that time I was really learning how to hold boundaries without being angry and controlling. But again, it takes practice and it takes some time and it takes some work, right? And so I was so thankful for that. And I think, you know, sometimes some people might think, well, like, oh, like my kids, you know, I still have to hold boundaries with them. They still need to know when I am angry. And it really is okay for kids to see people angry.
Mhm.
The big thing that I've been able to do with my kids that Language of Listening really helped with was to own my anger. So I actually snapped at my daughter yesterday. I snapped at her a little bit and then I was just like, I'm so sorry. Like you know, I'm really sorry I did that. And she's like, it's okay. She's like, I felt really bad for my teacher today. And I said, oh, you did? And she said, I think she was having a bad day. You know, and my kids, they have this lack of enmeshment or codependency, like where they like, it's okay for other people to have emotions. They don't have to make it about themselves. You know, whereas like when my parents got angry, they made it about me. Like it's your
Mhm.
fault. I need to spank you because you did a bad thing and you did this to yourself. And, you know, and putting all the blame on my tiny little, you know, 4-year-old body or whatever. Right. And so this is the thing, like my child can be in the playground at school and kids can say mean things, but when kids say mean things to her, she's just like, so what? And she runs off because she knows it's about them and it's not about her. And so anyways, it's just really amazing where it can take you from a place where like you need to release energy because your nervous system is triggered or your fight or flight is triggered, and it gives you a way to do that. Stomp your feet and your fists and you can even yell, oh no, angry mommy's coming. But again, it's this exaggeration. It's this, and the kids catch on. It's kind of a game, and it really helps things to, you know, to kind of you know, to smooth out. And so I really like that. And one of the things I would like to talk about is actually when your kid's the first one that's having those really big emotions, and then how much it does trigger us too,
Yeah.
right? We
Yeah.
get very triggered when our kids have big emotions when they're going into meltdowns and frustration and all that stuff. And yeah, I'd love to share with your listeners like what to do about that because a lot of kids with ADHD have really big reactions and really big emotions, and that's okay. And but what we want to do is we want to be able to get in there with them and give them the life skills that they need so that when those emotions rise up in them, they can do things that are both personally beneficial and socially beneficial so that they can still express their emotions, you know, be their authentic selves, get those issues solved that the emotions are showing. These are the issues that are showing up. This is the thing that, you know, that's crossing their boundary or that's feeling hard or whatever. But also like they're not like, you know, messing up their relationships, right? It's still also going to, you know, benefit them socially. So yeah.
Yeah. I think that's so many really great points. Talking about, you know, even that it's one of my big things with my students is making sure that I say repeatedly, it's always okay to feel the way that you feel.
Yes.
And I say that in classes when something maybe comes up with somebody and they're frustrated. It's totally okay to be frustrated. It's totally okay to be upset. It's always okay to feel the way that you feel. And so I think for us as the adults to be able to reinforce that as well, even with our own emotions, right? It's okay to be angry when something's going on with your kids. It's okay to be frustrated. It's okay to be
Yep.
annoyed. Um, it's just a matter of what we do when we feel that
Exactly.
way. And
Exactly.
I think even going back to, you know, our conversation earlier about how I think a lot of us have carryover from the way that we were parented. I think we also struggle with boundaries. I would imagine that's a bigger challenge for those of us of this generation is we struggle with boundaries if we had parenting styles that were very controlling. But the next word that came to my mind is demeaning, which isn't the most appropriate word, but I think it gets the point across. We, it creates people who struggle with boundaries and people who think, like you said, when somebody is experiencing a big emotion, you think it's your fault, right? I have that same belief that if someone else is angry or frustrated or upset, what did I do wrong?
Yeah.
And so I think those of us that are now trying to teach and parent the next generation, we are coming into these roles with so much of our own stuff. And I think one of the things I that's important for me to talk about too is that it's not ever what kids do that makes us angry, frustrated, annoyed, whatever. It's never what they're doing. It's the meaning that we assign to what they're doing. And there's almost nothing that kids can do that will cause me to feel angry. It just doesn't. I mean, kids, yelling, cursing, rolling around on the floor. It doesn't cause me to feel angry because to me, I know I've been doing this for a long time. It's never about me. Never. Even
Exactly.
if somebody,
Exactly.
doesn't want to be here, doesn't want to do this, it's not about me. It's about them and what they're feeling and what they're going through. But I think it's hard for us as the adults sometimes to distance ourselves mentally from that and to recognize that there what's the phrase, this kiddo isn't giving you a hard time, they're having a hard time.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah, I can definitely speak to that, the way that we look at it with language of listening, and maybe help people sort out how to uncover what their boundaries are,
mhm.
and how to how to honor them, really. Because it's so true what you're saying. Like it's not up to us to hold boundaries around which emotions other people feel, especially kids. It's not up to us to have boundaries around what they feel. It is our job to have boundaries around the way they express those things, right? Because again, we want them to get the life skills so that they're expressing their emotions in ways that are both personally and socially beneficial. Yeah. And so really what happens in childhood, when you're talking about, again, especially those of us from our generation, what ends up happening is that, we're raised in this reward and punishment kind of and for some of us, it was just mostly all just punishment. Like, let's be real, right? I think the older you are, the more it was just punishment. There was the reward part hadn't really come in yet.
I think the rewards were based on external factors. Like for me, it was on how smart I am. Well, that's not very changeable. I mean, but like I got rewarded, I got paid for good grades. I mean,
Yeah.
but now as an adult, I have this very distorted mindset that my value comes from achieving and accomplishing.
Yeah. For
Right.
me,
And
it
that's
was I got rewarded for being controllable. So I became a
for
people
being a good
pleaser,
child.
right? Yeah. Well, and for doing exactly what that my parents said all the time. Yeah, for sure. So what ends up happening when we're raised in this reward and punishment kind of paradigm, I guess we call it. Um, we start to lose our connection to our preferences. We start to lose our connection to what we like and what we dislike and our needs and all those things, because those are the things that are getting us into trouble. We're following who we are. We're following these, just the feelings that kind of push us towards doing things. And we learn that we have to get really good at knowing what our parents, our caregivers, our teachers like and dislike, right? What they prefer, what their preferences are. The thing is, our likes and dislikes, I learned this from language of listening, our likes and dislikes are what make up our identity. And so
Mhm.
when we're setting aside our preferences and setting aside our awareness and our connection to them, we're setting aside who we are. And then we start to be basing our identity on these other people, right? And so then we become adults and we don't know where our boundaries are. So we can either pick up and have the exact same boundaries as the people that raised us, but some of us are finding we don't like those boundaries or the way that they were held. And so we're left with what? We don't know what, right? So this is why one of the first activities I get my clients to do is actually get them to sit down, and your listeners can totally do this, and it's very, very helpful. Sit down and make a list, take 20, 30 minutes, write out everything you can think of that you like and everything that you can think of that you dislike. And like my list literally started with, I like red licorice because it's like my favorite thing in the world. I love like Twizzlers, like so delicious, right? And then that made me think of red wine. So I like red wine. And then that made me think of my husband because red wine was something that we drink together. And I really love my husband. Like, and just kind of going along like that. And then, I started writing other things like when I got to my dislike list, like I I didn't really enjoy Christmas with my family. Don't really enjoy celebrating Christmas with my family. Like, and my family of origin, the family I was born into, And so, like, your likes and dislikes is everything from food and clothes and colors and all feelings and experiences and all things people do and things you do and everything. All those things can go into your list, and they really start to get you reconnected. And then when you see a child in front of you and it's doing something, and maybe you're attaching meaning to it, the only meaning that really matters in that moment is, do I like that behavior or do I not like that behavior? And if you like that behavior, language of listening has a tool for you to use to really solidify that behavior in the child so that they continue on in that line of behavior. And then if you don't like the behavior, then they have a tool for you to use to support that child to change their behavior, so that you can hold boundaries around what they're doing. And it's really that simple. Like, it's so simple. Do I like it? Do I not like it? Right. And then in that way, you're showing up with your boundaries, which every child needs. They need adults around them that have really firm, loving, protective boundaries, because if there's no boundaries, that's also its own form of neglect, right? That's or I was going to say its own form of abuse, in a sense, like it's neglect, right? So it's the other end. It's the no boundaries at all, as opposed to like constant control, right? Those are the two far ends, and we really want to rest in the middle where we have firm, like I said, loving, protective boundaries. And the child feels protected. They might not always like it. They might not always like our boundaries, but they're really there, for the best for them. And so again, that's where we can start to let go of some of that meaning. That was definitely a thing that I needed to rewire my brain about, making meaning about, my children's behaviors, and other kids too. Because I also worked with kids for many years, and so mostly teenagers, but like, that whole idea of like, yeah, it's not about the meaning. And usually we make the meaning about ourselves. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so just saying like, do I like it? Do I not like it? Now I get to hold a boundary. It's so simple, like, but it's very, very powerful.
I'm struggling with that concept a little bit
Yeah.
because it seems, by saying whether you like something or don't like something, it does seem like you're making it about you, because it seems like you are being the gatekeeper for what you deem acceptable or unacceptable in your kiddo. So for example, if you have a kiddo who's autistic and they're spinning in a circle and you decide you don't like that,
Yeah.
but that's something that's really important for them to regulate themselves, it
Yep.
seems like you're being a gatekeeper over
Yeah.
what's allowable for them. And so I'm confused by separating their behavior by
Good.
what you like and what you don't like.
I'm so glad you brought that up. So in that moment, and maybe I'll just talk about when my child would have a complete meltdown and she'd be screaming and crying. So I'll tell you about, there was one time, I think it was just last winter, but it might have been the winter before. She was really struggling with clothes. We live in Canada, and so we've got some nice warm summers, but we have some pretty cold winters. And when the first snow came, she was not at the point where she was wearing anything on her feet but Crocs. So no socks and just Crocs. So no snow boots, right? And no snow pants. And that girl wanted to play outside in the snow so bad. It was everything in her wanted to play outside in the snow, and she was having this complete meltdown in her bedroom. So I went in and I, really validated her, and I used the language of listening tools. And at the same time, I didn't like the screaming. It was overwhelming for me. My ears couldn't handle it. And I didn't want to tell her she had to stop expressing her emotion. I knew it was moving her to a place where she would be able to figure out a solution, right? Because sometimes that's just what we need. We just need to move those emotions through our body. But I didn't like being in the same room. And so I removed myself. I said, I'm going to my room. I'm going to close your door and I'm going to close my door. If you really need me, that's where I'm going to be. But that was the boundary that I held, right? There's lots of different ways to hold boundaries. And I think that's the other thing that we really need some new brain wiring, is understanding like, what are the different ways of holding a boundary? Because your boundary is about you. Your likes and
Right,
dislikes are about you,
right.
right? So in that moment, I chose where my body and where my ears were going to be in that moment. It wasn't that I was trying to control her or get her to stop. It was that that I was holding that boundary, that I didn't like the screaming. I couldn't handle the screaming in that moment. And I honored who I am. And in that way, also, I'm showing my daughter that she can honor herself too. Because she has also, more than me, sensitivity to loud noises, right? So she can honor herself when the noises are loud and overwhelming. And she doesn't have to do it in a way of like, you little brat, stop crying. How could you do this to me? That's not the way that we treat other people, right? And so I was able to honor myself and her at the same time. And I think that for me is huge, because so many times we make it an either or. Either I have to do this thing for the other person, or I can do this thing for myself. But when we can hold boundaries where it's like, nope, they're loving and protective of both. I don't have to give up myself and sacrifice myself, and you do not have to sacrifice yourself either. We can both get our needs met in this moment, and we're going to find out a way to make that happen. Does that make
Thank
sense?
you. Yes, thank you so much for providing clarification on that. I have to admit, I was a bit concerned. And
Yeah.
so thank you very much for providing that clarification, because I think your example is a really great example, because just like you said, it shows that having a boundary doesn't mean you don't tolerate something. But it could mean that you just choose to remove yourself from the situation. So it doesn't mean that your child is in trouble because they're doing something that you don't like. It just means that maybe you're not going to continue to stay in that environment. And I
Yeah.
think that's very much in line with what I teach as well about, for example, if your kiddo, if you have asked your kiddo to do something and it turns into, them yelling or arguing or whatever the case may be, that it our response doesn't have to be yelling and arguing back. But we also, like you said, it's the combination of accepting that for some reason this is frustrating to them. For some reason this is exceeding their capacity to handle right
Yes.
now.
Yeah.
But we also don't have to stay in a room where we're being yelled at or argued with.
Yeah, we don't have to exceed our capacity either. And it's
Right.
actually setting a really good example for them and creating an environment where it's okay for them to have a certain capacity and it's okay for you to have a certain capacity.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think even when in the classes that I teach on Zoom, I think I talked about this in another episode recently, but um the my students are always expected to have their cameras on, but they can be muted at any time. And so some kids, I have one kiddo, and well, more than one kiddo that just likes to kind of sing and hum and that kind of thing. And then I have one kiddo that finds things in his environment that he will start messing with and playing with. And neither one of those matter to me at all, but I do expect them to mute themselves if that's what they're doing. So I
Yeah.
even had, I had one kiddo like playing the keyboard while we were having class,
Yeah.
but I also know that he's listening and he's paying attention.
Yeah.
I
Yep.
just need the boundary around that's really disruptive to everybody else.
You guys still need to
So
teach the class and everybody else still
yes.
needs to listen. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yep.
at no point is it not okay for those kids to do what they feel like they need to do.
Yeah.
At no point am I saying stop doing that. That's annoying. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
you can
and
sing
it's
and
like,
hum all you want
it's
to. Just put
what you
yourself on
said.
mute.
Yeah, and that's what they need to be able to listen a lot of the times, right? For sure. And
Mhm.
the beautiful thing about Zoom is that even if the child can't mute themselves, you can actually go in and mute them.
Yeah.
It'd be much better if they did because you're busy teaching your class, right? But like even you can still hold the boundary by pressing mute,
Yes,
on
and
them
I do,
yourself
and when
from your
that happens,
controls.
I just let them know. I say, hey, so and so, I'm just going to let you know that I'm going to mute you because that sound is
Yeah,
really distracting to the group.
yeah,
But feel free to unmute yourself when you have something that you want to say.
perfect, right?
And
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, okay.
It's so basic, really. Like it's just
Yeah,
basic respect. That's it.
I'm,
Yeah,
I'm really
you're
glad
respecting
that,
them.
that yeah, okay.
You're
That's
glad that what I was talking about when I was talking about the likes and dislikes wasn't what it sounded like at first.
yes, yeah, and
Yeah, and I'm so
it.
glad you brought it up. It's so important. It was such an important
Mhm.
concern you had. Yeah.
Yeah, and it reminds me too of one of the thought processes that I go through and that I talk to parents about too is sometimes, especially with kiddos who are neurodivergent, if we were to make a list of all the things that we wish they would stop doing or start doing or do differently, it could be exhaustive, right? And typically much more so than a neurotypical kid, right? We would have more things on the list typically.
Mhm.
And so one of the things that I really encourage parents and teachers, therapists, whatever your role is, to think about is what are the things that really are just about you? Like it just like for me, I cannot handle whistling. I
Mm.
cannot handle
Okay.
the pitch of whistling.
Yeah, you
And
know
I
that.
used to live with two people who love to whistle because most people enjoy whistling. And so we had to work out some boundaries around that because I don't want them to feel like they can't do this really joyful thing, but it makes my brain hurt when people whistle around me. And so when I talk to adults, parents, teachers, whatever, it's take that list of the things that you're struggling with, maybe a little bit with your kiddo, or things that you feel like you wish would be different. And part of that list are going to be things that are just about you. Nobody else really cares. And part of it are going to be things that actually can get in their way, whether it's socially speaking, whether it's academics, whether it's, job readiness, independent living, whatever the case may be. And my most prominent example of this is many years ago, I used to follow somebody who is autistic and had a big platform where he would talk to parents about raising autistic kids. And I remember he was doing a Q&A session, and a mom asked a question. Her daughter was college age, and she said, "My daughter constantly picks her nose, and I don't know how to address this." And his response was, "Does it bother her or just you? Because if it just bothers you, let it go." And my reaction is the opposite of that, because anybody who constantly picks their nose is going to have a really hard time making and keeping friends. They're going to have a hard time keeping a job. It's something like that actually can significantly affect somebody's life. And it's a simple thing. And so I stopped following that person because I thought we need to distinguish between the two. We need to distinguish between things that honestly don't really matter to other people, but we may have a boundary around it, like my example
Well,
of
there's a social
whistling.
boundary
Right.
there, really. There
Yes.
is. It is a social boundary.
And yeah, and things that can actually affect their future, right? That can actually affect them making friends, having relationships, things like that. The difference between accepting something, ACCEPT, like I accept that this is something my kiddo does,
Yes.
right?
It's just the reality.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is something they need to do. This is something my kiddo does. I accept that versus accept that. This is something my kiddo does, except that it's getting in the way of them being able to make friends, or of them being able to get to school on time, or, whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
So that's how I delineated it. Things that we can just accept, even if we need to have a boundary around it for us, versus things that we need to accept and have a strategy for how to support our kiddo with that. So the nose picking, I think, is my primary example, that I don't think that should be in the accept category because of the ramifications.
Because of the ramifications.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. So tell me what else is part of your coaching?
Yeah, well, I think what I'd like to do, because I want to make sure that we have time, is I do want to talk about that, what to do when your child is the one that's having the big emotion first, right?
Yeah.
And so, one thing that we'll hear a lot of, parenting people talk about, parenting coaches and experts and whatnot, we'll talk a lot about co-regulation, as in, like you stay calm and then your child will pick up your calm and grab your calm. And I don't 100% agree with that. Sometimes that's a good strategy. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it's what the child needs. But ultimately, first off, regulated does not equal calm. Somebody could be in the free state and be calm, but completely dysregulated, right? And actually what regulated means, and actually what regulated means is it's just that you have what you need to match the situation that you find yourself in. That's really what regulated means. And so just to say that a child is unregulated when anytime they're not calm, this is not accurate. And what I tell the people I work with is that the goal is never calm. The goal is never calm for the parent, and the goal is never calm for the child. Calm is a very wonderful byproduct of people being able to move their emotions through their body, the message it's giving, problem solve. right? If it's a problem, right? Feeling joy is not usually a problem for people, right? So, but it's that idea of, again, accepting the emotion, but really giving our kids skills. And so even if we go back to, my daughter that day when she was really, really upset, I knew that she was at the point where she needed to work through things on her own. Sometimes that's how things go, but not until after I had sat with her and validated her. And I really want to talk about what language of listening, what the validation looks like, but also especially with kids that really have big, big emotions, how we can get in, that emotion with them, right? So that we can model for them what to do when you're feeling so extreme, what to do when things feel really rise up, and you do have all those hormones and all that energy rushing through your body. Because to tell somebody, again, like I said about telling a mom she has to stop that yelling train, there's actually a better way to do it, to change, right? Where you don't have to try to use all that energy and force to stop it. And with our kids, it's so incredibly important. Well, it's even important for moms and dads that are upset. When you're so angry and upset, if all you do is stuff it, all you're doing is stuffing your boundaries, right? Because anger is generally just a sign that your boundaries have been crossed. And I found that my anger would rise up quite loud because it took a lot for me to hear it. I had stuffed my boundaries so far away. I'd stuffed my likes and dislikes so far away and devalued them so much that my body really needed to get really, really loud. And sometimes the same is true with our kiddos too. Their bodies need to get really, really loud, either just because it's overwhelming or because they really want to be heard and understood. They really, really do. And so language of listening tells us to match their tone and their volume. Okay. And so with some kids, again, some kids that are neurodivergent, they have extra sensitivity to loud noises. So you want to also be sensitive just to who your child is and what their senses are like, how sensitive they are. But with language of listening, let's actually go into the first premise, the first belief, and then the first tool, and then what that looks like, again, especially with, my child who has ADHD, and yeah, again, her emotions were much bigger than my other child's, So the first premise, the first belief of language of listening is that everything children do and say is communication, and they must continue to communicate until they are heard. So everything you're doing is just a communication. Just like you said, we don't have to add meaning to it, right? It's not telling us that we're a bad parent, or, just because our kid hit their sister once doesn't mean that they're going to be a bully, or they're going to beat their spouse, or doesn't mean that, but that's where our brains will go as adults looking at and judging children. So everything they do and say is communication. They must continue to communicate until they're heard. So that's why if we can dive into whatever that behavior is, whatever the meaning is, and really validate it, that puts them in a position where it's okay to have a problem. And when it's okay to have a problem, it's okay to go ahead and solve the problem, right? So then we get the problem solved, right? Instead of stuffing it over and over again. So the tool that goes with that belief, that premise, is that it's called Say What You See. And it's just validation. You just say whatever you see the child saying, doing, thinking, or feeling. And so again, when my daughter's really having a complete meltdown, and I'm going to validate her, we get triggered as parents usually when our child's very frustrated, very angry, and even as teachers too. Teachers also have those very similar nervous system, reactions. We can take that emotion, because typically that emotion rises up in us. That's really what co-regulation means. It's really more about the mirror neurons, I think, in our brain, but it's really a nervous system to nervous system kind of connection that we have with other human beings. And so when our child is really upset, instead of getting mad at them for being upset, because that's sometimes what we do, because again, that energy, those hormones are rising up in us, or thinking we have to stay really calm and patient so that child will become calm and patient. For what reason? They haven't solved the problem yet, right? So what we can do is we can match their tone and volume when we're doing the Say What You See. And I'll give you a school example, because my daughter also has a ton of school anxiety. That was the other thing that we really had to work through. And so I was using a lot of Say What You See with her before school, trying to get her to go. And I'd be like, oh, you really don't want to go to school, right? Like, you just wish you could stay with mommy all day. And that's great validation. But it was the day when I remembered that the language of listening book, which is called Say What You See, it says to match the child's tone and volume. And so that's what I did with her that day. I raised my voice and I started moving my hands and I said, you hate school. You're never going back. Right? Which is the thing we don't want to say as parents, because we're like, well, what if my child grabs onto that? But actually what that does is on a physical nervous system level, that tells her, I know what you're feeling. I actually know, and I'm with you in it. And when I said that to her, she actually got really calm. When I got big and loud, she got really calm because she was being understood. And she goes, well, actually, it's just recess I don't like. I'm having a hard time making friends. Could you write a letter to the teacher and ask the teacher if I can stay in at recess? And I checked in with my own boundaries first because I'm the parent and I got to check in with my boundaries, right? And I thought, I can write the letter. The teacher has her own boundaries. She can say yes or no. If the teacher wants to judge me for writing the letter, whatever. I don't feel like I care about that really. And so I said, sure, I'll write your teacher a letter. I said, that's often the teacher's break time. Sometimes they need a break from having all those kids around. So she might say no, but I'm totally okay with writing her that letter. And that girl got up and ate her breakfast and got dressed and put her snowsuit on and walked out to the van, which was not typical most days. Most days it was cajoling and begging, and she'd skip breakfast and we'd have to carry her out to the van just to get her to school, you know? And it was so different that day. And she checked in with me. Did you write the letter? Yes, I did. Put it in your folder, like it's in your backpack. But that's what allowed her to get to school that day without any fuss. But that information didn't come out until she felt fully understood. When I raised my voice, when I matched her volume, when I matched, her tone, that's when it came out. And time again, there's been times when she's had these massive meltdowns when I thought, when is she ever going to stop the yelling? How are we ever going to deal with this? Right. And so I get in there with her and I will match her tone. I'll match her volume, but I get mad with her for what she's mad about. I don't get mad at her, and again, it's a very different, because kids live in a very physical world. They live in the physical real world. They don't live in this verbal logical world that we adults live in, right? And I think that can also be very true for neurodivergent kids on a different level, where they really live in their reality, right? And so when we're doing Say What You See, we get out of our own heads, we get out of the meaning, right? And we just say what's going on in front of us. You're really upset. You hate school, right? You're never going back. You never want to go back to school. Because she really didn't. But at the same time, she did. It's like, it's so okay for us and for our children to feel more than one way about something. And even highlighting that for them in our validation, and I said the taboo thing, that we think, like, to say that they're never going back, that sort of thing. But I made it okay if that's what she was thinking. Right. I didn't make it okay for her never to go back to school. That's not what was happening. But I was acknowledging the reality that maybe she never wanted to go back to school. And then when it's okay to have that problem, it's okay to feel like you never want to go back. That's when it's okay to solve the problem about, well, how can we get you back to school, even though you're feeling this way. So any thoughts or questions about that?
Yeah,
strategy?
absolutely. I think listening to that at first seems really kind of shocking, to hear that you would raise your voice and match your child's tone. But what it made me think about is, the story goes that when I was 4 is when things got really difficult in terms of my behavior. And so, according to my family and the stories that go around, I was very physically aggressive. There are stories about me trying to get out of the vehicle anytime we were going somewhere, having meltdowns about having to put shoes on. And so obviously I don't remember that because I was 4, but I'm a very emotional person. And when I hear things, I can feel the feelings. Yes. And so anytime I hear those stories about myself, I can feel how 4-year-old me felt.
Yep.
And so my parents went to see a pediatrician because I was struggling so much. And my parents are both teachers, by the way. So they went to see a pediatrician, and what they were advised to do when I was feeling this way and acting this way was to put me in a sleeping bag up to my neck, and for my dad, who's taller, to hold me in the sleeping bag so that I couldn't hurt anybody, because then it's padded if I'm kicking or hitting. And so I have this memory, but I don't think it's a real memory. I think it's a contrived memory, but I have this image that comes into my head of him holding me in the sleeping bag in my bedroom with the light off and the fan off, and me just losing it until I would wear myself out and fall asleep.
Yeah.
So that's the memory I have. And even talking about it, it makes me emotional because
Of course it would.
I can feel the way that 4-year-old me must have felt in a situation like that.
Yeah.
But I think thinking about what you're saying right now is so interesting, because I think part of the frustration And I still feel this now as an adult. Part of the frustration is that those of us who have big emotions and big reactions, we're aware of that. We are aware that not everybody seems to feel things the way that we do, and not everybody seems to struggle with their feelings the way that we do. And so when I can picture 4-year-old me in a sleeping bag, one of the things that I can picture is nobody understands me because I am freaking out over whatever, right? Whatever it was, losing my mind over whatever's going on. And this person holding me has no emotion. And so it's almost like
Right?
it validates that there's something wrong with me
So
because I'm
isolating.
freaking out. Yes.
Yeah.
And even now as an adult, I there are times where something will really bother me or really upset me or frustrate me. And all I want from another adult is for them to also be bothered or upset by the
Right?
situation. Not that
Right.
we're not going to go, we're not going to go light fires about the situation, but
No.
I really just need validation that there's nothing wrong with me for being upset about this
Right?
situation.
Right.
And so I think I've actually never heard that perspective before of matching their tone and volume,
Right.
but I can tell you that that's what it's doing is it's helping them feel like there's nothing wrong with them for feeling the way that they're feeling.
Because they already are.
Right.
It's already the reality. That's already what's happening. And can you do? You can try to stuff them in a sleeping bag and completely isolate them and invalidate their feelings, or you can give them the skills to move that emotion through their body in a way that's both personally and socially beneficial, right? So I'll tell you, you probably already know this already, but 4 is typically the time, they talk about, what do they say, terrible twos, and they call them three-naters and stuff. I mean, I hate that stuff. But, also 4 years old is also a time, right? And that's when my daughter got really loud. So I'm going to share with you what I did with my daughter from a language of listening perspective, to say this is what I would really recommend for other people, to do with their 4-year-olds. That really, really works very well. And so my daughter, when she felt out of control at home, the one thing she would do is, first off, she would go around the house and find anything she could to knock on the floor. She would knock everything off the table, everything. And you know why she did that, Steph? And if you really think about it, if your listeners really think about it, we actually do try to trigger emotions in other people so that we're
Mm-hmm.
not alone in our emotions. She knew that I found that really triggering when she threw stuff on the floor. She knew she would get a really big reaction out of me. That means A, she's not alone in how she's
Mm-hmm.
feeling. Okay. But B, as parents, this is actually a beautiful part of being human. I think it's absolutely incredible. Our children will do this so that we will show them what to do when they're feeling how they're feeling. Show me, mom, what to do when my body feels this way. It's such a cry for help. It's such a cry for connection in that moment when they're feeling out of control, or they're so new to the world. At 4, you're so new to the world. So what I did is I knew that in those moments there were one of two needs she was trying to meet. In language of listening, we talk about 3 needs: experience, connection, and power. And I knew that she was either needing to meet her need for power, throwing everything on the floor, right? Or she was trying to meet her need for connection, because when it's feeling hard to get our need for connection met, we'll often switch over to the need for power, actually. And so the first thing I would do whenever she was having a tantrum, because she would throw tons of stuff on the floor, and then she would end up on the floor pounding and kicking, like in a way that I thought she was going to hurt herself. So the first thing I would do was I would sit just a little ways away from her on the floor. I would put myself on her level, and I would open my arms and I would say, "Mommy's here." That's, do you need the need for connection met? So that in that moment, I was staying calm. And I
Mm-hmm.
tell you what, 9 times out of 10, she would crawl on my lap, because I think I was just very busy and I was not as aware as I could have been of how much my kids needed emotional connection with me. So again, 9 out of 10 times she would crawl on my lap, she'd cry herself calm, and away she would go, right? I wouldn't tell her to be quiet or anything. It was fine. The times when like she didn't move, when I would get on the floor and say, "Mommy's here," with my arms open, and she's still pounding and screaming, I would run and get a pillow. I would bring that pillow back. I would sit on the floor and I would start pounding the pillow, right? Because it's much better for her to pound a pillow than to pound the hard floor. And I would say, "Oh, you're so upset about blah, blah, blah," right? Like, you're so mad that this and this and this happened. And it's funny, what I'm doing for her is showing her, and I'd invite her, come pound the pillow with me, whatever. but she wouldn't even need to, which I thought was the most hilarious thing. She would get up and just be like, and be happy and just walk away because she felt understood, right? That
Mhm.
connection was there. Now, as she got older, there have been times where we've needed to figure out a way to move things through her body, right? Sometimes just laying in bed and kicking and flailing on the bed. We get so upset as parents when our children are doing this thing, but like it's just human. It's just a human thing. We have
Mhm.
these hormones and this energy that builds up in our body for a reason, and we need to move it through our body. Otherwise, it gets stuck in there and we start to get sick. I mean, anybody who listens to Dr. Gabor Mate will understand, that idea. So really equipping our kids with ways that they can move those emotions through their body, ways that they can move the anger through their body, whether it's running around the house, going outside and running circles around the house, and mom do it with you, right? It's so powerful when we model for our kids, this is exactly what you do. But again, if you go back to that idea of like, actually, our kids many times are trying to trigger emotions in us, and we think it's such a terrible thing for them to do. What a little jerk, like what, like, right, like, and it's like, there's nothing jerkish or a-hole-ish about it or anything, these things that people think. It's like literally the child is asking for help in a very human way. This is a thing that, I mean, sometimes spouses do this, right? Like this is a thing
Mhm.
that we do as humans. Even you were saying, I love it when somebody agrees with me and gets upset with what I'm upset about. Everybody does, because it's so validating. We weren't meant to experience emotions alone. And
Mhm.
our kids need us to model for them what to do in the midst of those emotions. It's just the way it works.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a couple things that I want to add on to that that kind of validate what you're saying.
Yeah.
Um sometimes there are plenty of times I've been doing in this field since 2004. So, oh, 20
20
years.
years.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow. Whew. So there are definitely times along the way where something will happen with a kiddo and I don't know what to do next. And there are times where I get downloads from whatever you want to call it, God,
Yeah.
universe, spirit,
Yeah.
whatever you want to call it. I call it the universe. I will get a download and it will literally just be like, do this, say this. And so one time when I was early in my career, I was teaching and I had a class for kids with behavioral challenges. And I had this newer student. He was in sixth grade and he was bigger than me. I'm not a very big person. And he was a big kid.
Yeah.
And then we're in a class for kids with behavior issues. So, he's kind of intimidating. And I remember one time we were the only two people in the classroom. The other kids were all doing lunch or something. And he was on the computer and I had let him know that, his time was up and he wouldn't get off the computer. And so after a while, I just kind of went over and turned it off and he turned it back on. So I went over and unplugged it and he plugged it back in. Um, and then something else happened and he got really upset. Like he started yelling and the universe just came into my brain and it said, hug him. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, but I just like what you said, I went over to him. I think I sat on the floor because I'm
Yeah.
trying not to be,
Yeah.
overpowering or intimidating. And I just like what you said, I just held my arms out. This kid fell on top of me
Aw.
and bawling, just bawling. And we're just laying on the floor. Like I have my arms around him and he was on top of me and just crying about whatever it is that was bothering him.
Yeah.
Um, but that's so stuck in my mind because that is absolutely not your instinctive response when somebody starts yelling or, being angry is to hug them. But I've done that with multiple kids since then. And it's amazing how, just like you said, that need for
Need for
connection. There was
connection.
obviously something going on with him that day that I was not aware of.
Yep.
And so it comes out as anger and frustration.
Yep.
But the moment I sat down and just opened my arms,
Yeah.
there's a completely different kid.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Wow. Hey. Wow.
that was the first thing that I want to say. And now I don't even remember what my other thoughts were. But I do want to make a side note that I have to say, you guys that are listening, I told you guys when Rose and I started this conversation that I had never heard of this program that she's talking about before. And I also tend to be pretty, how do you say that word? Oh my gosh, I have a word in my brain and I can't say it the proper way.
Shoot.
Speculative, like
Yeah.
spectacle, like what is the word? Oh my goodness.
Depends on what you mean.
That's so weird. I tend to be kind of suspicious of,
Suspicious.
that's not the word I was trying
That's
to
not the word.
say, though.
Okay.
That was my thesaurus version. Of parenting programs in general, because
Yeah.
I feel like they're not always in line with how our kids work and how our kids are
Yeah.
wired. But Rose, I have to say that I'm really loving this conversation.
Aw.
And you have taught me strategies and concepts that I've never thought about before. And not to brag, but I kind of know a lot about
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
neurodivergent
get, I
kids.
get that. I get that vibe from you.
And
You know?
and so
Yeah.
I have really enjoyed this conversation because not only have you shared so much that I think is beneficial for, the families in my audience. I think even for me personally, I'll say, the raising your voice and matching them back, I think like that just resonates with me so deeply because I can absolutely see in hindsight from my own childhood how that was actually alienating and isolating for me
Yeah.
to feel like I'm the only person in the world who has these big emotions. And I'm the only person in the world, that doesn't know, how to respond. And what's interesting is one of the things I've noticed at Starfish Social Club, when we have kids in person, but even on Zoom, when things like that happen at Starfish, when somebody is crying, yelling, upset, frustrated, in a neurotypical environment like a classroom, most of the other kids are really put off by that, right? They don't understand, like, why are you doing that? We're in fourth grade. Like, most of the other kids are like, what is happening? In my environment, I noticed that very rarely do the kids react that way. Sometimes they just kind of ignore it and let it play itself out.
Yeah.
Often they will approach the kiddo and see what they can maybe do to be helpful. I've even had some kids that will go sit with somebody who's having a hard time and just try to talk to them. And so I have noticed that in my environment with my kids, I think it's that we get it, right? We relate to what it's like to be so upset. And
Yes.
even in Zoom right now, I have a young kiddo who significant progress in the 6 months or so that he's been in the program. But when he first started, every time we had class, he was yelling and frustrated about something. And the other kids, I see them, especially the older kids, because he's younger, will go out of their way to like include him and talk to him and laugh at his 7-year-old jokes. And, like
Yeah.
there's just this common ground, I think, for those of us who struggle with emotional regulation
Yeah.
to just see and know that there are other people who do also. I just think it's a very different reaction and response when you're around someone else who understands that. And so to be able to show our
Absolutely.
kids that and one of the things I do is anytime somebody's upset, I will say something, it's always okay to feel the way you feel.
Yep.
And I will often say something like, if that happened to me, I would be frustrated too.
Aw.
I will often say, and even the kiddo that I'm talking about on Zoom, he will get frustrated sometimes when we transition. And I'll say, yeah, I don't like it when I have to stop doing something I really wanted to do either. It's just that validation that, God, I would feel the same way if that happened to me.
Yeah.
That is so annoying when people do that, But I think it's just, and usually when I talk to him like that, he's fine. It's,
Yeah.
he expresses his emotion, and then I just validate, yeah, I would absolutely feel the
Yeah.
same way. And then he's fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
Because
that
it's
was,
okay. It's just okay
Mhm.
for him to be who he is, right?
Mhm.
And like you were saying, like that guy, he used to be, having those meltdowns frequently. That's how it was with my daughter. She would have meltdowns many times a day. And I thought, how am I ever gonna, because it's exhausting. It's hard,
Yeah,
right? It's
yeah.
hard for her. It's equally exhausting for her as it is for me, really, in some way. Well, and maybe it's even more exhausting for her because it's her own issues she's dealing with,
Mhm.
but still, it's very, very exhausting. And now I just want to point out too that like I'm okay with my daughter's meltdowns at this point. Now the thing is, what we've done is we've reduced the inflammation, right? We've helped her work through so many of the issues that she had that they're not coming up numerous times a day. But I'm okay with her having meltdowns still now. And again, they only happen a few times a year now. So I have
Oh,
more emotional energy to
wow.
deal with them. But I'm still getting the message, A, that she knows it's okay for her to have big emotions, which is really
Mhm.
important to me. And
Mhm.
B, like I know she's still going to come to me with her problems, right? Like I get to be the person that's there to support her when things are feeling really big and really hard.
Mhm.
And now I just know the difference,
Mhm.
right? Like I know the difference. Like this is really hard for her. Instead of again it happening 5, 10 times a day, right? When something does come up, now I know, okay, this thing is really, really hard for her. She's going to need a little extra, And to me now, it's just a message. How loud she is, right? It's just a message. But again, it's just so easy for me to handle that at this point too, because it's only happening a few times a year. It's not happening,
Yeah.
5 to 10 times a day. So
I would just like to say the word I was trying to say earlier is skeptical.
skeptical. You remembered it. You remembered it,
I don't
Steph.
even
Good for you.
remember what I was saying earlier, like
Just
what
maybe that you're
other
skeptical about parenting models. You
that's
know,
the word I was trying to
yeah,
say, and
yeah.
it would not come out of my
Yep.
mouth.
Yeah. Good for you. You remembered.
I hope that doesn't become a thing because that was interesting. Um, but yeah, Rose, thank you so much for this conversation.
Welcome.
This has been a really amazing conversation. Um, I do want to have you tell everybody where they can find you online. Is there anything else that you want to share before we wrap up today?
Um, no, I don't think so. I mean, I think this was fantastic. I think that, we talked about a lot of things and it's probably a lot of things for people to kind of, get into their head. And I call this, when we're learning new things that don't fit in with the brain wiring we already have, mental gymnastics, because that's how I really felt when I was learning the language of listening program myself. There are a lot of things that would just kind of be like, I'd be like, Sandy, can you say that again? Like, I don't understand. Like, does not compute. And then eventually the brain wiring got in there. So there's a lot of mental gymnastics. There's a lot of very different ways of looking at things because this society, man, the things that they teach us about kids, this
Mm-hmm.
wrecking parenting, right? This whole idea that babies are
Mm-hmm.
manipulative and all that stuff. Like it doesn't help parents, it doesn't help kids. It's ridiculous, but it's the stuff that gets hardwired into us,
Yeah.
right? And so there really is a lot of shifting and changing. So, and it's okay if your brain's fighting back against some of the things that I said, check in, see if you like it or you don't like it. Like it's okay
Yeah.
for you to, really pay attention to how you feel about things too, so.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Okay. Let everybody know where they can find you online.
Okay, so if people are watching the video, I don't know if they're going to be listening or watching the video, but it does say that my name is Rose from Love the Way You Parent. So Love the Way You Parent is my business. It's where I coach moms and dads, sometimes apart, sometimes together. And so you can find me online if you go to Facebook and you look up Love the Way You Parent. You will find a business page, which I'm not super active on. You will find a Facebook group that you can go through. Either one of those, you can just scan tons of posts and learn tons of things. I'm also on Instagram under Love the Way You Parent with underscores between the words. But really, if you're interested in reaching out and talking to me, lovethewayouparent@gmail.com. Go to lovethewayouparent.ca and or is it .com? I think it's .com. I think it's both. Lovethewayouparent.com, pretty sure. And so yeah, just look me up on Google, from those words, and happy to chat with people and yeah, and just connect.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
This amazing conversation. I'm very glad that we
That's
connected.
fun.
And I just want to throw some love to Rose, just so everybody listening knows what's happening. I am planning to go on a trip. And so I needed to get some guests on the show before I left so that I would have episodes ready, since I don't want to try to record when I'm gone. And I put a call out in a podcast group that I'm in, and Rose is one of the people who responded. And then that was like 2 days ago, maybe yesterday. I don't
Yes.
know.
Yeah.
I think 2
Yeah.
days ago. So I'm very grateful to Rose for just jumping on here with such short notice and rolling with me. You and I must have similar, just adaptable personalities in that way. So thank you for that.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you for having me. This is great.
Yeah, absolutely. So to everybody who's listening, thank you guys for being here, and I'll see you again next week. I am really glad that you're here.